Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Everyone, please be seated.
Let's go on the platform.
Okay. Now I can use the hand.
Yes.
Is it this one?
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Near North chapter of Lyric Opera of Chicago's conversation between Associate Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsberg and Anthony Freud, Lyric's General Director, President, and Chief Executive Officer. I'm David Miller, and I'm President of the Near North chapter. At this time, I ask that you take a moment to silence your cell phones or any other electrical devices that you might have. Also, I ask that you please not take photographs during the conversation. The idea for tonight's program originated several years ago following a Soirée Cedille event that Erica and I attended, and Justice Ginsberg was there as well. It just so happens that Cedille's president, Jim Ginsberg, is the justice's son. Sometime later, I either phoned him or emailed him and asked him what the chances of getting his mother to do a program for us might be, thinking he would say, "You are insane." But instead, he said, "You'll just have to contact her." So after several years, tonight, this crazy idea has finally come to fruition. Jim will introduce his mother and Anthony, but first I'd like to give you just a little information about him. While he was a student at the law school at the University of Chicago, he founded Cedille Records in 1989. Cedille is dedicated to including all genres of classical music and presenting the finest classical Chicago musicians. Cedille has recorded more than 180 records, has had 16 Grammy nominations, and garnered 6 Grammy Awards. I now present Jim.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, for that generous introduction. As Dave noted, I am the founder and president of Cedille Records, Chicago's Grammy-winning nonprofit classical record label, with a mission of recording and promoting Chicago's finest musicians in all genres of classical music, including, I should note, vocal recitals and operas. We're quite proud of our 2 opera recordings, Giancarlo Menotti's The Medium and Chicago composer Robert Kirka's The Good Soldier Schweik. And as for vocal recitals, we actually have 2 coming out this month, one with Nicole Cabell and Allison Cambridge in a program of duets with orchestra, and the other program called Songs from Chicago, All Chicago Composers, sung by Thomas Hampson with Chicago pianist Kwang Hao Wang. So you might want to check those out. Now, I'm in the superfluous position of introducing yes, 2 people who need no introduction, especially for this crowd. But I have been asked to say a few words about Anthony's history before becoming General Director of Lyric Opera in 2011. Anthony, of course, is a native of England. He ran the Houston Grand Opera for 5 years before Lyric and the Welsh National Opera for 10 years before that. His parents were Hungarian war refugees. In fact, his mother was an Auschwitz survivor. Anthony attended his first opera at age 4 and became a regular opera goer in his teens, and reports that by age 14, he knew he wanted to run an opera company. He went to law school anyway. And graduated with honors from London's King's College in 1978, but instead of following a career in the law, as you know, he chose to follow his passion for opera, and we're all very glad that he did. So now as for my mother, how many here saw the RBG documentary either in theaters or on CNN? Okay, so in very broad strokes, you know she is the second woman on the United States Supreme Court. She was on the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. for 13 years before that, served as a law professor at Rutgers and Columbia Law Schools before that, and also established the ACLU Women's Rights Project, successfully arguing numerous Supreme Court cases establishing the principle of sex discrimination as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. A notion totally alien to the court until she arrived. More recently, she's been dubbed the notorious RBG, on a meme that spread like wildfire online for her passionate dissents on the Supreme Court. Well, I've been asked to speak a little bit about how my parents' love for music and opera inspired my life and my career choice. And I have to go back to a line Mother has said many times. She has said, "James was a lively child." But she noticed that classical music actually soothed the savage beast, and I would listen in rapt attention. So they started taking me to concerts, I think even younger than 4. There were concerts at Hunter College across the street from where we lived, the Light Opera of Manhattan that did the Gilbert and Sullivans, New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts, which back then were directed by Michael Tilson Thomas, and those were very memorable and very important in my early musical education. And quite quickly, I graduated to the New York City Opera and the Metropolitan Opera performances as well, absolutely devouring all of it. And I was a pretty strange child. I would be known to walk down the streets of New York singing Figaro's Act 1 arias, Se vuol ballare and Non piangrai, doing my best Cesare Siepi impression. I wonder if Anthony has any similar stories to tell. And also, like Anthony, I abandoned a potential career in the law. I actually was going to the University of Chicago Law School. Unlike Anthony, I did not do anything like graduating with honors. I dropped out halfway through. And my parents, I think, were a little trepidatious about my changing careers, but they quickly became my biggest supporters because I dropped out to run Cedille Records full time. And now this has really come full circle because this June, exactly timed with the 25th anniversary of Mother's appointment to the Supreme Court by Bill Clinton in 1993, we released an album of music in her honor, featuring her daughter-in-law, my wife Patrice Michaels, not only as the featured performer, but also as the composer of the major work on the album, which is called, it's a song cycle, The Long View, A Portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 9 songs. And the album also includes songs in Mom's honor by 4 other composers, including Chicago composer Stacey Garup, and it is actually our contribution to the notorious RBG industry. So I think there's some cards about this and the Hampson album in the back if you want to check them out. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anthony Freud and my notorious mother.
Justice Ginsberg, I know that you would like to start by talking to us a little bit about opera and the law.
Yes.
Let me just say what a thrill and an honor it is for you to be joining us here in Chicago and for me to be chatting with you this afternoon. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And thank you for inviting me many times to meet with this group. So for, I hope not more than 15 minutes, I'm going to speak about my favorite art form, and particularly law and lawyers in opera. My competence to address this topic, I confess, is questionable, for I cannot illustrate my remarks by breaking out in song. My grade school music teacher ranked me a sparrow, not a robin. I was instructed to mouth the words and never sing out. Still, in my dreams, I am sometimes a great diva, most often Renata Tebaldi, sometimes Beverly Sills or Marilyn Horne. I do have a performing career. It begins and ends with the Washington National Opera, where I have 3 times appeared as a super. And I debuted in 1994 along with my colleague, Justice Scalia, in a production of Richard Strauss's Ariadne of Naxos. We were supers again in the same opera, different production, in 2009. And in between, I was on stage with Johann Strauss's Die Fledermaus at Prince Orlovsky's ball in the lush second act of Fledermaus. 3 black-robed justices entered on the stage as specially announced guests, billed as the Supremes. Franked by Justice Kennedy on one side and Justice Breyer on the other, I had the extraordinary opportunity to hear, as entertainer at Prince Orlovsky's ball, Placido Domingo, whose glorious and still tenor voice at very close range was electrifying. November 2016, I had a speaking role in an opera. There are not many of those. Opening night of Daughter of the Regiment, I portrayed the haughty Duchess of Krakentorp. And I wrote the lines she spoke. Well, truth be told, lawyers do not fare well in opera. Think of Dr. Bleen, the lawyer in Fledermaus. His ineffective assistance gets for his client, Eisenstein, a few extra days in jail. Or the lawyer in Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, who offers Bess a divorce for $1. But when she tells him she was never really married before, he ups the price to $1.50. Law does have a conspicuous role in numerous opera plots. A leading example is Wagner's Ring Cycle. 4 operas, all save Rheingold, running on rather long. The relationship between the Ring Cycle and the law was brought home to me years ago when a law clerk applicant submitted as his writing sample an essay titled The Importance of Contract as Played Out in Wagner's Ring Cycle. The Sturm und Drang, he explained, stemmed from Wotan's breach of his agreement to compensate the giants, Fafnir and Fasolt, for building Valhalla, heavenly home of the gods. I hired that law clerk applicant on the spot. And on church-state conflicts, what seemed more powerful than the Grand Inquisitor's confrontation of Spain's King Philip in Verdi's Don Carlo? Wills are plot turners in many operas, among them Gianni Schicchi, the Puccini opera in which Woody Allen made his operatic directing debut in 2008 in a Los Angeles opera production. The entire first act of Janacek's The Macropolis case takes place in a lawyer's office. An entire act. But some have said it is the dullest act of the opera. Trials and inquests abound in grand opera. A select few, the Revolutionary Tribunal condemns the poet Andrea Chenier. In Aida, there are the priests who condemn Radames for treason, and in Norma, the pagan throng that lets the high priestess burn for breaking her vow of chastity. A trial for murder in apartheid South Africa is staged in Kurt Weill's Lost in the Stars. And in the first act of Oscar, an opera by Theodore Morrison that opened in Santa Fe a few years ago, Oscar Wilde is tried and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for gross indecency. A shipboard court-martial takes place in Benjamin Britten's Billy Budd. Some background for that scene. Billy is as good as he is beautiful. He is relentlessly pursued by First Officer John Claggart, who epitomizes malevolence. Claggart falsely accuses Billy as the ringleader of a planned mutiny. Billy, who has a tendency to stutter, cannot get out words to answer the accusation. He strikes Claggart, and the blow results in Claggart's death. A drumhead court is convened by Ship Captain Vere. That court found Billy guilty and sentenced him to death to be carried out the following morning. Captain Vere accedes to the court-martial's verdict in an aria titled, "I Accept Their Verdict." There was a nonfiction model for Captain Vere. Author of the novella on which the opera is based, Herman Melville, had a father-in-law, Lemuel Shaw, who strongly opposed slavery, but was also chief judge of the Massachusetts judiciary, obliged by his oath to enforce the fugitive slave law, implementing the Fugitive Slave Clause in Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution. A conflict of that same order confronts Captain Vere. He knows Billy is good and truthful, and Claggart evil and untrustworthy. Yet the law requires that a sailor found guilty of assaulting a superior officer must hang from the yardarm. Captain Vere's aria expresses his how he wrestles with the conflict between man's law and what justice warrants. Like trials and inquests, jails and prisons are settings of choice in grand opera. Prison scenes are staged in Fidelio, Trovatore, Faust, Tosca, Dialogue of the Carmelites, Dead Man Walking, and scores more. There is also a famous escape scene in Bizet's Carmen. Carmen is dispatched to jail, but she escapes after negotiating a rather unusual plea bargain with the soldier Don Jose, who was ordered by his superior officer to bring Carmen to jail. In light opera, Gilbert and Sullivan's satirical take on the legal system, judges, and lawyers have amused legions of audiences since Gilbert and Sullivan's first collaboration in 1875 in Trial by Jury. The plot of that one-act opera revolves around a suit for breach of promise of marriage. The presiding judge first tells us how he achieved his high office by marrying a rich attorney's elderly, ugly daughter. Chief Justice Rehnquist was a great Gilbert and Sullivan fan. He quoted in Opinions for the Court both Trial by Jury and Iolanthe. And he copied for his new robe adorned with 4 thin gold stripes on each sleeve, he copied the costume worn by the Lord Chancellor in a low-budget production of Iolanthe presented summers ago in D.C. by a local company. Another Gilbert and Sullivan favorite, Pirates of Penzance, contains an illustration of the distinction between textualist and purposive construction of the law. The opera's hero, Frederick, when he was a little lad, was on his father's instruction to be apprenticed to a pilot. Frederick's nursemaid, Ruth, being a little hard of hearing, apprenticed Frederick to a pirate instead of to a pilot. The terms of the apprenticeship Frederick would serve, he would serve the pirates until he reached his 21st birthday. When Frederick had lived for 21 years, he is released from the pirate band and he undertakes to annihilate his former colleagues. But the pirate king and hard-of-hearing nursemaid Ruth, who has become the piratical maid of all works, pay a visit to Frederick when he thinks his piracy days are over. They tell him of a most amusing paradox. Frederick was born in leap year on the 29th of February. Strict construction of the text of his bond would make Frederick a lad of 5 and a little bit over. Purposive interpretation would count his years on earth and acquit him of his obligation to the pirates. 2 closing comments about opera at my workplace. In 1988, Justice Harry Blackmun arranged the first ever afternoon of music at the court. Initially, the recitals were held every other year. Under Justice O'Connor's baton, after Justice Blackmun retired in 1994, the program became an annual event, and since 2002, when I picked up the reins, the event takes place twice a year. Opera prima donnas and prime dons who have performed at our recitals include Stephanie Blythe, Renee Fleming, Susan Graham, Denise Graves, Bryn Terfel, Thomas Hampson, Marcello Giordani, and Samuel Ramey. Among instrumentalists, Yo-Yo Ma, Leon Fleischer, Wynton Marsalis, Itzhak Perlman, and 2 you will find on CD recordings, Rachel Barton Pine, Jennifer Coe, oh yes, and 2 more, the Vermeer and the Pacifica Quartets. The recitals provide a welcome pause from the court's heavy occupations. We time the spring musicale in May, in the beginning of May, before the pressured late May through June weeks when the justices are consumed with production of all outstanding opinions before the court recesses for the summer. To end on a high note, I will tell you of an operatic work that will be staged by Delaware Opera in the spring of 2019, paired with Trial by Jury. A multi-talented composer, graduate of Harvard, and then he tried Yale for a master's in music, and finally, thinking it would help to know a little bit about the law, he enrolled in his local law school, the University of Maryland Law School. His name is Derek Wong, and he is the composer of the comic opera titled Cedille Ginsberg. It has already been performed at Castleton when in fact, it was Lauren Mazel's last year. And it has been performed in the Glimmerglass Festival in Cooperstown, New York. And many of the lyrics come from our opinions and speeches. A sample, Justice Scalia's Rage aria. The justices are blind. How can they possibly spout this? The Constitution says absolutely nothing about this. My answering aria in my beautiful lyric soprano voice. Dear Mr. Justice Scalia, you are searching in vain for bright line solutions to problems that aren't so easy to solve. But the beautiful thing about our Constitution is that, like our society, it can evolve. The theme, two people with notably different views on constitutional interpretation can nonetheless respect and genuinely like each other. Collegiality of that sort is what makes it possible for the Supreme Court to do the ever-challenging work the Constitution and Congress assign to us, without the fierce partisanship that sometimes, and notably now, mars the operations of the political branches of government. Thank you.
So, Justice Ginsburg, picking up your final point, do you think if more people in public life loved opera and were prepared to share their love of opera with one another, that public life would have more civility?
I think so, and I have one piece of evidence. When I performed as the Duchess of Krackendorp, there was a standing ovation at Kennedy Center. I think there were Republicans there as well as Democrats. Two people didn't stand up, Newt Gingrich and his wife.
Point taken. I'd like to return to your love of opera and some specific operas in a moment, but I'd like to start by just talking a little bit with you about your status as a rock star. Just to remind people of the extent of that status, Jim in his introduction talked about how notorious B.I.G. morphed into notorious R.B.G. You have two notorious R.B.G. signature cocktails. You've appeared, in some ways, on the Cartoon Network, You've been referred to on TV shows like Scandal and The Good Wife, and you've been recreated on Saturday Night Live. There's nail art, Halloween costumes, a bobblehead doll, an action figure, tattoos, T-shirts, coffee mugs, a children's coloring book, a workout book, 2 movies, one that Jim referred to earlier, which has already been released, but one that is soon to be released, which is actually even more intriguing, which is a drama about the life of you and your husband, Marty. You'll be played by Felicity Jones, and your husband will be played by Armie Hammer. But actually, my favorite of all the examples that I want to refer to are that the researchers at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History gave a species of praying mantis the name Lamantis ginsbergae after you. The name was given, gets better, the name was given because the neck plate of the Lamantis ginsbergae bears a resemblance to a jabot, which you're very famous for wearing, and, this is the best bit, the new species was identified based upon the female insect's genitalia instead of the male of the species, honoring your fight for gender equality. So I think it's safe to say that no other justice, however scrutinized, however respected, has so caught the public's imagination. And yet I was intrigued to read this quote from you in which you say, "I just try to do the good job that I have to the best of my ability, and I really don't think about whether I'm inspirational. I just do the best I can." I have to say, you're not doing so well at not being inspirational. How do you juxtapose your role as one of the great judges of our time on the Supreme Court with this extraordinary, iconic status?
Well, first, let me explain the connection between the notorious B.I.G. and me. I think the creator of the notorious R.B.G. had in mind that we were both born and bred in Brooklyn, New York. Notorious R.B.G. was created by a second-year student at New York University Law School. When the Supreme Court decided the Shelby County case, this is a case that took the heart out of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And this second-year law student was angry. Then she thought about it and realized that anger is not going to get her anyplace. She should be active. She should do something positive. So she took the announcement of my dissent from the bench in the Shelby County case, and she started this Tumblr, and then it just took off from there. One product you didn't mention is there is a room freshener flavored bubble gum.
Sorry for missing those. When did you first become aware of opera?
At age 11, I was taken to a high school. This is the year 1944. And there was a conductor. He had an all-city orchestra. His mission was to turn children on to beautiful music. He left the United States in 1948, and what he said was, in all the years I've been conducting, no one has ever called me maestro. And that was so because the man, whose name was Dean Dixon, was African American. So he went off to Europe, where he was everyone's darling, very popular. He married well, and he returned to the United States in 1968. Every major symphony orchestra invited him to be guest conductor. And I think that that is one example of the change in the United States from 1944 to 1968. I mean, in the opera world, I have a photograph taken at the Met of Marian Anderson when she was in, let's see, she was Ulrika in the Masked Ball. And there are stagehands, everyone is looking up at this great singer who was asked to sing at the Met finally when she was not at the top of her swing. So that's how I got turned on to opera. And as many other people did, because when I told this story on an intermission feature at the Met, many people wrote to me to tell me that they had been introduced to opera by this great man. The opera was would not be my first choice for a child. It was La Gioconda. But I was just overwhelmed by the glorious music, the drama. And then I started going to the city center where the New York City Opera performed, to rehearsals if I could manage it. And then finally graduated to the Met.
Yeah. So there have been many distinguished new operas written in the last few years about contemporary subjects, but the art form is still really dominated by its historic heritage, and that historic heritage has in turn been dominated by white men portraying the world as they saw it from the perspectives of their time. And our world and our perspectives have changed beyond recognition. Are you troubled by how traditional opera portray, for example, women?
Most heroines are frail, consumptive, mistreated by men. And Butterfly is a perfect example of that. But Puccini wrote another opera, Fanciulla, where Minnie saves her man from the gallows. I was trying to think of operas where women have, Fidelio, of course, Leonora. And some would include Tosca because she stabs.
And Brunhilde saves the world in The Ring.
Yeah, but her father puts her down, doesn't he?
But it is, I think, a problem for opera companies around the world today to find a way of presenting these operas so that they have resonance and meaning to younger contemporary audiences who find it hard to relate to some of the things and circumstances they've seen portrayed on the traditional opera stage. Cultural appropriation is another issue for us. The cultural stereotyping in, say, Butterfly or Turandot. How can we grapple with some of these issues?
I don't think that we should do it by trying to update those operas. They are a reflection of what the society was.
Justice Scalia told a story about how when you were in Agra in India with him, you cried when you first caught sight of the Taj Mahal. So did I, incidentally. What did you find about it so moving?
It's so perfect. We had been in India for a while, and most of what we saw was not beautiful. But the Taj, especially if you go there when there aren't crowds, it's just magnificent. It's so perfect. I had been there in India earlier, and I cried, and I told Scalia that he would too when he saw it, and he did.
Does opera make you cry?
Oh yes, yes, all of the time.
Because of the perfection of the sound?
Well, I know Mimi's going to die, but every time.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple of examples of specific operas which have legal issues. You very eloquently set the context of Billy Budd's execution and the reason for that execution. In the epilogue, Captain Vere, and you quoted his earlier aria, I Accept Your Judgment, but in the end, he sings in an outpouring of guilt, I could have saved him. Mm-hmm. He knew it, even his shipmates knew it, though earthly laws silenced them. What have I done? Could he have saved Billy? Should he have saved Billy?
Well, Captain Vere feared mutiny, which had happened recently on another ship. Yes, of course he could have saved Billy, and he should have saved Billy. But then we would not have had this gripping opera.
Are there times when humanity and basic morality can justifiably dilute or even alter the letter of the law?
Yes, well, you come from the UK, so you know that the whole system of equity was developed in order to counter the rigidities of the law.
Yes.
And it over time became rigid itself.
Yes.
But at least at the beginning, that's what it was.
You also mentioned Jake Heggie and Terence McNally's Dead Man Walking, a piece that, incidentally, Lyric is planning in a couple of years' time. Yeah. The scenario is that Joseph de Rocher, who's a death row inmate, is guilty of a terrible crime. Of that, there is no doubt. And the opera is about the impact of the death penalty on the families of the victims of the crime, the families of the criminal, and on Sister Helen Prejean, the key figure at the heart of the opera, who's become a type of spiritual sounding board for Joseph de Rocher, and who herself suffers her crisis of faith as a result of the issues. Is this a compelling presentation of some of the issues around the death penalty?
It is powerful. I think if the audience were polled at the end of a performance of Dead Man Walking, should the death penalty be abolished, the answer would be overwhelmingly yes. It is so moving. And it starts with this horrendous crime that Joseph de Rocher it was done at the Washington National
Yes.
Opera, and Susan Graham, who was the original Sister Préjean, played Joseph de Rocher's mother.
Yes.
And there was a very nervous mezzo who
I'm
was
sure.
doing Sister Préjean. It was Kate Lindsay.
Yes. Obviously, as we know, in your career, in our lifetime, a number of US states have abolished the death penalty. Has that been as a reaction to public opinion turning against it, or has that been more an attempt by the law to lead public opinion in a particular direction?
Some states have abolished the death penalty. Many other states have the death penalty on the books, but there are no executions. California is an example of that. Each year, the number of executions has gone down. And now there are some 6 states where executions occur regularly. And in those 6 states, it's not the state as a whole, it's a particular county. I think Louisiana is a good example where in one county, the prosecutor asks for the death penalty in every murder case, and in another county, the prosecutor doesn't ask for the death penalty. So it's administered in this uneven manner. There are more and more decisions that say certain people can't be executed. So juveniles, people who are mentally incompetent, people who are intellectually disabled. But I think there's a good chance the death penalty is going to die by attrition.
What's the opera that means the most to you?
That means the most to me? Oh, I don't know. It would be hard to pick out one. I thought you were going to ask me what is the Taj Mahal of operas for me.
Feel free to answer that question instead.
And that would be The Marriage of Figaro.
Tell us why.
But because it is so marvelous. This combination of Da Ponte, I mean, it's very funny, but it's got a serious, it's kind of the upstairs, downstairs of its time.
Written at a moment of turmoil and revolution
Yes.
in European history.
Yes.
What's the greatest operatic performance you've ever experienced?
It was at the Old Met. It was Forza del Destino, and it was the night that Leonard Warren died.
You were there that night?
Yes,
Good heavens.
yes. I was there. 2 indelible memories that I have of the Old Met, and one was that night he had just finished his great aria, and he keeled over. There had been a doctor in that scene to come out and tell the tenor tell the baritone that the tenor has survived. And that doctor came out on stage when that play doctor, when Leonard Warren keeled over. There was a long intermission, and then Rudolph Bing came out and said, "Leonard Warren died tonight. We will not continue the performance." And the other very special moment was the double debut of Leontine Price and Franco Corelli in Trovatore.
Also at the Met?
Yes.
You said earlier that you only became a lawyer because you didn't feel you had the talent to become an operatic diva. Had you become an operatic diva? You mentioned you had dreams about singing like Tebaldi and like Beverly Sills and like Marilyn Horne. Well, those three singers represent a wide variety of repertoire. What would your dream role have been?
Well, I would probably have said Leonora.
In Fidelio?
Yes.
Justice Ginsberg, that makes perfect sense, given your life and career.
There was a production of Fidelio at the Washington Opera. It was Jessica Zambello's production. And it starts out with Florestan is on a soapbox and there's a crowd all around him. And his colleagues are distributing literature. And then the police come and drag him away. Leonora then takes the coat off a dead soldier, puts it on, takes his scissors and cuts her hair. I think it was a good beginning to let the audience see the character of Leonora.
Yes. Justice Ginsberg, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Please sit down.
We have a small presentation from you from Erica Eric.
Oh.
Yes, it's on. Oh, thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. This has been such a wonderful evening, and Justice Ginsberg, we were absolutely delighted for you to be here, and I certainly hope that you will come back and join us again sometime soon. And Anthony? And Anthony, I want to thank you as well for being here. It's been such a pleasure, and I think this evening was just one for the memory book, and I just hope all of you enjoyed it. And we do have a little gift for you that we would like you to have. So on behalf of the Lyric family, I would like to present you. Do we have a present? Oh, there it is.
Shall we see?
Okay, this is just a little bit of history from the Lyric Opera. Oh, and it's going to fit it matches your outfit. It
actually does perfectly.
It does. It's perfect. It is this was worn in La Boheme by Musetta in 1973. So we want you just to have a little a remembrance from the Lyric Opera family, and it was done by historically it's been very relevant to the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and we just wanted to share that with you as you have shared a great deal with us tonight. Anthony, we haven't forgotten you. You are our star. So we know that you would like to have coffee with RBG every morning. So the cup is...
Thank you very much. Let me just say a word or two more about the hat, because
yes, please do. Yeah.
It has appeared on stage at every Lyric Opera performance of La Boheme since 1972, until today. And the reason we can spare it is because on October the 6th, we are opening a new production of La Bohème, our first in 46 years. And Justice Ginsberg, we would love you to join us either for opening night or any performance at Lyric in the coming years. But you now are the proud owner of Musetta's hat.
Yes.
So I think I'll wear this to the opening night of the Washington Opera, and we'll see if anyone in the audience will recognize it.
Please, please send us a photo of you in the hat.
Yes. We'd love to have that. Anthony, your mug will be on your desk next week.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
But we want to thank you all. And I want to thank everyone here for being here this evening. It's been a great evening, and thank you again. Also like to invite you to remain for a short period of time, because we do have the bar and the hors d'oeuvres will be still available. So please join the reception, and thank you again all for being here. It's been a wonderful evening. And thank you again.